In the late 1970s, the world was locked in a Cold War. It wasn't a direct war between the US and the Soviets. Instead, it was a long, tense rivalry. The United States, leading countries that believed in democracy and capitalism, and the Soviet Union, leading countries that followed communism. Both sides competed for influence around the globe. If one side gained a new ally, the other side often tried to push back. Afghanistan sat in a strategic spot, right on the Soviet Union's southern border and close to the Middle East. In 1978, a communist party had taken over Afghanistan. They introduced land reforms and changes to traditional Afghan culture, but many Afghans hated it. Soon, Islamic fighters in the countryside began to rebel. The Soviets wanted the communist government to stay in power because it shared their ideology and kept Afghanistan in their sphere of influence. At first, the Soviets tried giving advice and sending military aid to keep this communist government in power, but the rebellion wasn't easy to crush. So, in December 1979, the Soviet Union made its move. They sent tens of thousands of troops into Afghanistan. Soviet forces stormed the capital, killed the Afghan leader who had fallen out of Moscow's favor, and installed a new one who would follow Soviet orders. For Washington, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was more than a regional conflict. It was a dangerous move on the Cold War chessboard. Afghanistan wasn't just any country. Take a look at the map. It borders Iran, Pakistan, and sits uncomfortably close to the Persian Gulf, a region that holds the world's largest oil reserves. In the minds of U.S. policymakers, if the Soviets tightened their grip on Afghanistan, they could threaten oil routes, intimidate U.S. allies, and expand communist influence into the heart of the Middle East. Whoever had influence in Afghanistan could project power into Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East all at once. And in the Cold War, the perception of expansion mattered almost as much as the territory itself. If the Soviets could invade and hold Afghanistan, it would send a dangerous message that Moscow was on the rise, and America couldn't stop it. President Jimmy Carter called the invasion the greatest threat to peace since World War II. His administration saw it as part of a larger Soviet strategy to push south, gain warm water access, and possibly challenge the West's dominance in the Gulf. So almost immediately, Washington decided it wouldn't just watch from the sidelines. Soon, the CIA began working in the shadows, quietly supporting Afghan rebel groups who were battling the Soviet army. The CIA didn't hand money or weapons directly to the rebels. Instead, it sent them through Pakistan, where the ISI, Pakistan's intelligence service, became the middleman. The ISI controlled how the money and weapons flowed, often favoring hardline Islamist commanders over moderate ones, setting Afghanistan on a path of turmoil and war. The strategy was simple but ruthless. Use Afghan fighters to drain the Soviet Union's resources, morale, and willpower, until Moscow had no choice but to pull out. This wasn't the kind of operation you read about in newspapers. It was covert, hidden from public view, shielded by layers of secrecy, and known only to a small circle in Washington and Islamabad. Eventually, this shadow war was given a name: Operation Cyclone. The Afghans fighting the Soviet army were called the Mujahideen, an Arabic word meaning those engaged in jihad. They weren't one single army. The Mujahideen were made up of many different groups, including tribal militias, nationalist leaders, and Islamist commanders. These groups were spread across the country, often tied to the regions and communities they came from. Some fought mainly for Afghanistan's independence. Others saw the war as a holy mission to create an Islamic state. The United States wasn't funding the war alone. Saudi Arabia promised to match every American dollar, dollar for dollar, pouring in billions of dollars over the years. But all that money and weaponry didn't go straight to the fighters. It first passed through Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI. The ISI had enormous power in deciding who got the weapons, and they had their own priorities. They funneled the biggest share to the most hardline Islamist commanders, the ones they believed would be most loyal to Pakistan's interests after the war. Washington knew Pakistan favored certain radical groups, but during the Cold War, defeating the Soviets mattered more than micromanaging where every rifle ended up. One of the ISI's favorites was Jalaluddin Haqqani, a charismatic, battle-tested commander from eastern Afghanistan, often described by American officials at the time as the CIA's golden boy. Haqqani was skilled at guerrilla warfare, controlled strategic mountain passes along the Pakistan border, and commanded a network of well-supplied bases. Crucially, he welcomed foreign Muslim volunteers with open arms, offering them training, shelter, and access to his camps. Among these guests was a wealthy young Saudi named Osama bin Laden. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, much of the Muslim world was outraged. To many, this wasn't about communism or capitalism. It was about a non-Muslim army occupying Muslim land. Young Muslims from across the Arab world traveled to Afghanistan to join the fight. One of them was Osama bin Laden. He was the son of a billionaire construction family close to the Saudi royal court. He grew up religious and serious-minded, heavily influenced by Islamist thinkers. With the wealth he had inherited from his father and a network of contacts across the Arab world, bin Laden's hardline Islamist convictions turned the war into a personal mission. He made his way to the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, bringing money and contacts to support the Afghan rebels, build camps, and bring in other Arabs to join the fight. At first, he wasn't a major player on the battlefield. He was based in Peshawar, Pakistan, where he built connections with Afghan leaders, including Jalaluddin Haqqani, and began funding recruitment centers and training camps for foreign fighters. Over time, he crossed into Afghanistan, even taking part in a few battles against Soviet troops. By then, the CIA was pouring weapons and money into major Afghan commanders like Haqqani, while bin Laden operated independently. The CIA never directly funded him, but he moved within the same war economy they had created. And through figures like Haqqani, bin Laden gained access to the camps, safe havens, and supply lines that US-backed aid had helped build. By 1989, the war was over. After nearly a decade of heavy losses, a collapsing economy, and no clear path to victory, the Soviets pulled their troops out of Afghanistan. The US had achieved its goal without sending a single soldier into combat. Osama bin Laden left and returned to Saudi Arabia, but Afghanistan was far from being peaceful. The war had scattered mountains of weapons, left behind training camps, and produced thousands of battle-hardened fighters. By the time the CIA pulled out in 1992, Afghanistan had more weapons than schools. With no strong government in place, rival Mujahideen groups began fighting each other. Cities were destroyed, and ordinary Afghans suffered through constant violence. Then, in 1996, a new force rose from the chaos: the Taliban. They were a hardline Islamist movement that quickly took over most of the country, including the capital, Kabul. The Taliban's strict rule brought order for some, but also stripped away many freedoms. Meanwhile, bin Laden's hatred for the United States was hardening into something far more dangerous. His resentment burned for three main reasons. First, US troops were stationed in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War. To him, foreign soldiers on the land of Islam's holiest sites was an insult. Second, the US strongly supported Israel, which he believed harmed Palestinians. And third, he saw America's involvement in conflicts across the Muslim world as bringing suffering to Muslims everywhere. In the late 1980s, just before the Soviets left Afghanistan, bin Laden had helped create a new organization, al-Qaeda. At first, it was a network of veteran fighters from the Afghan War, but its mission was bigger: to unite Muslims in a global jihad and target the far enemy, the United States and its allies. By the time the Taliban took power, bin Laden had found his perfect base of operations once again. By the late 1990s, Afghanistan had become the ideal safe haven for Osama bin Laden. The Taliban ruled the country, and old allies from the Soviet war, like Jalaluddin Haqqani, still controlled territory and fighters. Years earlier, during Operation Cyclone, the CIA and Pakistan's ISI had poured money and weapons into Haqqani's hands to fight the Soviets. That support built a powerful militant network with training camps, supply routes, and battle-hardened men. When bin Laden returned to Afghanistan in 1996, he stepped right into this ready-made system, a system born from a war America had once funded. The Taliban gave him protection. Haqqani gave him access to his camps and fighters. The war infrastructure left behind from the 1980s became a foundation for al-Qaeda's operations. The CIA never directly gave bin Laden weapons or money, but the networks and resources built during the Soviet war were now in bin Laden's hands. From his Afghan base, bin Laden began to test this power. Al-Qaeda struck U.S. targets abroad, most notably the 1998 bombings of the American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, and the 2000 attack on the USS Cole in Yemen. These attacks killed hundreds and proved that the machinery left over from Operation Cyclone could project violence far beyond Afghanistan's borders. But bin Laden wanted more. He believed that a massive attack on U.S. soil would drive America out of the Middle East and inspire a global jihad against it. In the late 1990s, a man named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or KSM, met with bin Laden deep in the caves of Tora Bora. KSM was a seasoned militant with a long history of plotting attacks, and he was obsessed with one idea above all: turning airplanes into weapons. KSM pitched his plan, hijack passenger jets, and crash them into key targets in the United States, including the World Trade Center. Bin Laden approved. To him, it was the perfect way to strike a massive blow at America's heart, using the same sanctuary and support network that had once been a Cold War asset. From Afghanistan, bin Laden had everything he needed. The Taliban offered protection. Haqqani's network provided training camps, fighters, and secure mountain territory, facilities that had once been stocked and strengthened by CIA and Saudi money. KSM oversaw the details, from selecting hijackers to teaching them how to blend in while living in the West. Al-Qaeda recruited young men from across the Middle East, some with flying experience. 4 were trained as pilots, first in Afghanistan, then at flight schools in the United States. Others were trained as muscle hijackers to take control of the planes. By mid-2001, the team was in place, living quietly in America, waiting for the signal. The same networks built with CIA and Saudi money during the Soviet War were now being repurposed for something entirely different, planning the deadliest terrorist attack in U.S. history. The same golden boy, Haqqani, once funded by the CIA to fight the Soviets, was now a close ally of bin Laden, offering safe havens and resources to the network that would go on to carry out the 9/11 attacks, killing nearly 3,000 people. The funding during the Soviet war didn't directly create 9/11. At the time, it achieved America's goal of pushing the Soviets out of Afghanistan. The real problem came after. When the war ended, the U.S. walked away. There was no plan to rebuild, no effort to bring stability. Afghanistan was left shattered, full of armed fighters and powerful warlords. From that chaos, the Taliban rose to power. And under their protection, Osama bin Laden built al-Qaeda into a network capable of striking the United States. In the end, it wasn't the money or the weapons alone that led to 9/11. It was what happened after, leaving behind a battlefield that would one day send its violence back across the ocean.